The wind howls through the broken stones of an ancient palace, the air thick with the scent of myrrh and the memory of blood. In the shadows of Jerusalem's ruined throne, a crown lies abandoned, its gold stained by the sin of a queen who defied heaven itself. They called her Athaliah, the grandmother who murdered her own bloodline to seize the throne of Judah. But what could drive a mother, a ruler, a daughter of kings, to slaughter her future with her own hands? Was it madness, or something far darker? An ancient curse whispered through generations, waiting for one proud heart to awaken it. Some say her name was blotted out by divine fire. Others believe her spirit still walks the corridors of lost prophecy. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. And if stories like this one move your heart, make sure to subscribe. Imagine walking through the dust-choked streets of ancient Jerusalem. The sky a bruised gold above, the temple bells echoing faintly in the wind. The stones beneath your feet whisper the names of kings and prophets long gone. Somewhere beyond those city walls, where olive trees bend and shadows lengthen, the story of a woman named Athaliah was carved not in marble, but in fear. She was a queen, a daughter of Jezebel and Ahab, born into power, schooled in idolatry, and wrapped in silk dyed by sin. Her name was spoken with reverence once, as the princess of the northern kingdom. Yet in time that name would become a curse, a warning to every mother who dared to place ambition above blood, and every ruler who believed they could outwit God. Athaliah's tale is not merely history, it is a mirror. A reflection of how pride, when unrestrained, can twist love into hatred and power into poison. Hers is the story of how darkness, once invited into the heart, does not simply stay, it spreads. But before the crown, before the slaughter of her kin, there was a kingdom divided, and a prophecy whispered in secret. Judah was weary. The line of David, sacred and chosen, had grown thin and corrupted. And from the north came influence, subtle at first, like the scent of incense drifting on the wind. Jezebel's legacy crept southward through her daughter, through Athaliah's marriage to King Jehoram of Judah. What began as alliance became infection. The temple priests felt it in the air, the strange idols hidden in corners, the murmured prayers not meant for Yahweh. The people looked up to their queen and saw the glimmer of Tyre's gods in her eyes. The prophets warned, but their words fell like rain upon stone hearts. Yet even then, even amid corruption and sin, the divine hand was not idle. There were whispers of a coming reckoning, a fire that would cleanse the royal house no matter the cost. For when the covenant is broken, heaven's silence is never permanent. The scrolls tell us that Athaliah's reign began not through coronation, but through blood. Her own son, King Ahaziah, was slain in battle. When she learned of his death, something inside her, whatever spark of motherly love remained, died too. What replaced it was cold, calculating fury. She saw her moment and she took it. In a single night, the palace ran red. The royal children, her grandchildren, were hunted down, their small cries swallowed by the drums of rebellion. One by one, the heirs of David fell, until Athaliah stood alone, the last queen of Judah, crowned in silence and shadow. But what could drive such horror? Was it madness inherited from Jezebel, that infamous queen who painted her eyes before facing death? Or was it something deeper, a curse that clung to bloodlines and thrones alike, a curse that consumed all who sought to defy divine order? Archaeologists have unearthed fragments from that era, seals bearing her name, inscriptions half erased by time. Some say they carry a strange energy, as if the stone itself remembers the terror of her reign. Others believe the very soil of Jerusalem still whispers her crimes, especially where the temple once stood, desecrated by idols she allowed within its walls. Yet, hidden in the chaos of her rise, there was one secret the queen could not erase. A child survived, a single infant, saved by faith and courage, hidden within the sacred chambers by a priest named Jehoiada and his wife Jehosheba. For 6 long years, that child, Joash, heir to the house of David, was kept from the eyes of the queen who believed she had destroyed them all, and so the prophecy endured. The flame of David's line flickered but did not die. Athaliah believed herself invincible, seated upon a stolen throne, her name etched in the annals of kings. Yet every echo of her footsteps in the marble halls carried the sound of a curse, of judgment drawing near. For no matter how far power stretches, it cannot reach beyond heaven's decree. Even today, theologians and historians ponder her story. Was she simply a product of her lineage, a victim of her parents' godless ambition, or a conscious defier of divine will? Her name has become a symbol, a warning that the thirst for control can make even a queen destroy her own blood. As you walk through the ruins of ancient Judah in your mind, picture the ghost of Athaliah pacing her empty throne room. The torches flicker, the silence is heavy, and if you listen closely, perhaps you'll hear what the prophets once whispered: "Pride may wear a crown, but the judgment of God wears eternity." But what if I told you? The truth was hidden in plain sight all along. The desert wind carried whispers of kingdoms and curses. Before Athaliah's name became synonymous with blood and betrayal, it began in the glittering palaces of Samaria, the heart of the northern kingdom of Israel. Marble corridors echoed with hymns not to Yahweh, but to Baal and Asherah. Perfumed incense drifted upward toward painted idols, and golden light spilled through lattice windows where the queen herself, Jezebel, ruled with the charisma of a serpent. It was here that Athaliah was born, a child of conflict and prophecy. Her mother, Jezebel, had come from Sidon, a city that worshipped the storm god Baal, bringing with her a faith that defied the God of Israel. Her father, King Ahab, though descended from warriors and prophets' warnings, had long surrendered his soul to her influence. Theirs was a household of grandeur and blasphemy. As a girl, Athaliah would watch her mother stand before the altars of Baal, wrapped in crimson veils, her hands raised high as thunder rolled over the mountains. She learned early that fear and reverence could be forged into power. While other children played among fig trees, Athaliah studied her mother's eyes, the way they silenced men, the way they turned guilt into obedience. One evening, as torches flickered along the palace walls, Jezebel took her daughter by the hand and whispered, "Never trust the prophets, child. They see too much and understand too little. Their God is jealous, ours gives us power." That was the seed, small, poisonous, and rooted deep. The years passed, and Athaliah's beauty grew as dangerous as her ambition. The priests of Baal praised her wisdom. The courtiers bowed low, sensing the presence of royalty that carried both allure and menace. Yet even among her splendor there were signs, omens the prophets tried to warn her family about. A raven found dead at the temple gate, a storm that lasted 7 days and nights, the burning of Naboth's vineyard, and the curse Elijah spoke over her parents' house. "The dogs shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel." When that prophecy came true, and her mother's blood was licked by wild dogs, Athaliah's heart turned to stone. She never forgot the sound, the cries, the horror, the fulfillment of divine justice. But rather than repent, she hardened. Her faith in Baal became defiance against the God of Elijah. She would never kneel, not to heaven, not to man. So when her hand was offered to Jehoram, prince of Judah, the southern kingdom, the land of David, Athaliah accepted not out of love, but opportunity. She would bring her mother's gods to Jerusalem. She would rule where even prophets once tread. The marriage was celebrated with splendor. Musicians played, dancers swirled, and the union of Israel and Judah was hailed as divine reconciliation. But the prophets wept in silence. They knew the covenant of David was being poisoned from within. Under Jehoram's reign, Judah began to darken. Altars to Baal rose beside the temple of Yahweh. The sacred vessels disappeared, replaced by idols with eyes of stone. Priests loyal to the covenant were exiled, some slain in the night. And Athaliah, now queen, stood beside her husband. Her expression serene, her will unbending. In the quiet hours of dawn, when the city still slept, she would ascend to the palace roof. From there, she could see the smoke rising from both the temple of God and the shrines of Baal. Two faiths coexisted uneasily beneath the same sky. Yet in her heart, she knew which one she meant to prevail. Jehoram was not a strong man. His father, Jehoshaphat, had been righteous, but Jehoram lacked his father's wisdom. He sought counsel from his queen, and she gave it freely, cloaked in charm and subtlety. Why worship a God who hides his face? She once asked him as they stood overlooking the city. The prophets say he is holy, yet he destroys his own people. Look north, my king. Baal rewards devotion. He gives rain, fruit, victory. All he asks for is loyalty. Jehoram's hesitation faltered under her persuasion. The court followed. Within a few short years, Judah's identity began to blur. Children born under Athaliah's influence grew up hearing the songs of Tyre instead of the Psalms of David. But heaven was not silent. Far from the palace, in the wilderness of Judah, prophets still spoke the word of the Lord. They warned of judgment, of fire, of exile. And among them, one voice, Elisha's, rose above the rest. His spirit burned with the same holy fire that once consumed Elijah's enemies. He looked toward the palace of Jehoram and declared, "Because you have led Judah astray, the plague shall rise in your own house. Your people shall revolt, your sons shall die. You shall be struck with an illness until your bowels fall out by reason of the sickness day by day." And so it began. The rebellion came swift and brutal. Enemies from Edom and Philistia swept through the land. Jehoram's armies failed. His alliances crumbled, and the plague struck his body with agony. His bowels indeed wasted away, just as the prophet had spoken. Athaliah stood by his side, her expression carved from marble. She did not mourn. When the king finally died, the people buried him not among the kings but apart, unmourned, unloved. Her son, Ahaziah, ascended the throne. Young, impressionable, and entirely under his mother's shadow, she whispered in his ear as she once did to Jehoram. He too followed the ways of the north, but fate, divine and merciless, was circling closer. While Ahaziah reigned in Judah, the northern kingdom faced its own reckoning. Jehu, anointed by Elisha, rose against the house of Ahab with a sword of divine vengeance. He slaughtered the prophets of Baal, the priests, the princes, and the blood of Jezebel's line stained the soil of Jezreel. Ahaziah, visiting his northern kin, was caught in that storm of justice. He fled, wounded, but Jehu's men pursued him and struck him down. His body was brought back to Jerusalem, where Athaliah received the news that her son, the last tether of her legacy, was dead. The palace fell into silence. Servants hid, priests trembled. None dared approach the queen, for they knew what happens when grief and pride mingle in a heart already claimed by darkness. Athaliah did not weep. She did not call upon God. She stood before her mirror, her face lit by the dying light of the evening lamps, and whispered, "If my son is dead, then the throne is mine." That night, she summoned her guards, one by one. The royal heirs were taken, children, nephews, cousins, all who carried the blood of David. The sacred line that had endured wars, exiles, and divine promises ended beneath the cold hand of a grandmother who could not bear to see another rule. It was not madness. It was conviction. She believed herself chosen, a vessel of destiny, perhaps even divine vengeance for her mother's death. In her mind, she was securing her power, ensuring that Baal would reign unopposed. But heaven remembered every cry. Unbeknownst to her, in the temple nearby, a faithful priest named Jehoiada watched and waited. His wife Jehosheba, who was also the sister of Ahaziah, heard of the slaughter. In the confusion, she stole away one of the royal infants, Joash, and hid him in the chambers of the Lord. The torches burned through the night as Athaliah's soldiers searched, but the child was gone. Hidden beneath the very shadow of the altar, the last ember of David's covenant flickered weakly, yet unextinguished. As dawn rose over Jerusalem, the queen stood upon the palace balcony. The people gathered below, silent, uncertain. She lifted her arms and declared herself ruler of Judah. The sun behind her painted her silhouette in gold, but her eyes gleamed like cold steel. For 6 years, her rule would cast a long and dreadful shadow over the land, and though her enemies were silent, prophecy was not. For even as she believed her reign secure, the whisper of destiny moved through the temple halls, cradling a hidden child who would one day bring her downfall. Some say that on quiet nights, Athaliah would hear faint echoes from the temple, the cry of an infant she could not find. She dismissed it as memory, as madness. But the priests knew, the angels knew, and heaven was waiting, because even in the silence of wickedness, prophecy breathes, and that's when the prophecy began to unfold. The throne of Judah gleamed beneath the morning sun. but its gold was cold. For 6 long years, Queen Athaliah ruled from the palace that once echoed with psalms of David and Solomon. The songs were gone now, replaced by the hollow chants of Baal's priests and the murmured prayers of fear. Her reign began with blood and was sustained by terror. She rebuilt altars to foreign gods upon the very hills where prophets once walked barefoot, in communion with heaven. The smoke that rose from Jerusalem was no longer the sweet incense of worship. It was the stench of rebellion against the divine. And yet, for all her cruelty, Athaliah believed herself righteous. In her mind, she was restoring order, Baal's order. The God of Israel had abandoned her family, she reasoned. He had cast down her mother, slain her father's line, and permitted her son's death. So she would turn from him completely and build her own eternity, free of his decrees. Each morning she would ascend the palace balcony, her silken robe catching the wind, and gaze toward the temple. The priests still tended its fires, though fewer dared speak the name of Yahweh aloud. She saw their faith as defiance, their silence as challenge. And so, slowly, she began to infiltrate even the temple's walls. Gold from the treasury was diverted to her idols. Sacred vessels were melted down. Statues of Baal were placed in hidden chambers where holy relics once stood. Some say the Ark of the Covenant was sealed behind thick doors during those years, not out of reverence, but out of shame. The people grew restless. Famine haunted the land. Children cried out in the streets for bread, while the queen's priests promised that Baal would answer, if only Judah offered more sacrifices. And some did. Out of desperation, out of fear, the high priests of Yahweh, led by Jehoiada, watched in silence. He was an old man now, his beard silver, his eyes weary but burning with faith. Within the temple, beneath the marble floors and incense-filled corridors, he and his wife Jehosheba guarded their secret, the child Joash, rightful heir of David. By night, Jehosheba would rock the boy to sleep, whispering lullabies of the covenant. By day, she hid him among the priest's quarters, wrapped in coarse linen, his laughter muffled by the hymns of worship. The child grew in the shadows, his only sunlight the dim glow of the temple lamps. There were nights when Jehoiada would stand before the altar and ask, "Lord, how long will you stay silent?" His voice trembled, but his faith did not. He believed in divine timing, that even in the reign of darkness, heaven was preparing the dawn. Meanwhile, in the palace, Athaliah began to see enemies in every corner. Dreams haunted her. She saw her mother's blood on the walls, the faces of slain children staring from the shadows. Sometimes she would awaken screaming, clutching her chest, gasping for air. But by morning, the queen was composed again, her crown polished, her smile returned. She would descend to the courtyard where her advisors bowed low, afraid to meet her gaze. "Send word to Tyre," she ordered one day. "We will renew the alliance. Their merchants bring wealth, and their priests bring power." And so caravans came from the north carrying idols carved from cedar and gold, strange relics etched with symbols older than the kingdom itself. The palace glimmered with their treasures, yet beneath the surface the city decayed. Rumors spread quietly among the people. The queen has cursed the land. Crops failed. Storms came without rain. Children were born still. And at night, jackals were seen roaming near the palace walls. An omen none could ignore. Still, Athaliah ruled. Her pride was a fortress. Her faith in Baal, absolute. She believed herself untouchable, chosen by destiny to rewrite the line of Judah. But one evening, something changed. It began as a whisper, no louder than the rustle of olive leaves, a rumor that one of the royal heirs had survived. It reached her ears through a trembling servant, whose hands shook as he spoke. "My queen," he whispered, kneeling low. They say one of the king's sons still lives, hidden among the priests." The hall grew silent. The torches flickered. For a moment the queen did not breathe. Then she laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed against the marble. "A child? After 6 years? Do you take me for a fool?" The servant stammered. "It is only a rumor, my queen." "Then let it die with you," she hissed. And with a flick of her hand, the guards dragged him away. But the seed was planted. That night, Athaliah could not sleep. The shadows on the walls seemed to shift and whisper. In her dreams, she heard the cry of an infant, soft, insistent, near the temple. She awoke drenched in sweat, clutching her chest once more. Just dreams, she told herself. Just the ghosts of the past. Yet in the temple, the truth breathed quietly beneath the moonlight. Jehoiada, guided by a force greater than fear, began to gather allies. Levites, captains, and elders of the tribes, men who still remembered the covenant. They met in secret chambers, lit only by oil lamps and hope. For 6 years, Jehoiada had watched and waited. He had seen Athaliah's cruelty and Judah's suffering. Now, as the child Joash turned 7, the age of divine completion, Jehoiada knew the time had come. God's promise does not die, he whispered. It only waits, they planned carefully. The guards loyal to the temple were divided into groups, each sworn to protect the boy with their lives. The plan was bold, dangerous, and sacred, to crown the hidden prince as king of Judah, in the house of the Lord itself. On the appointed day, the temple was filled with worshippers. Drums echoed softly. The smell of incense hung heavy. Among the crowd, tension pulsed like thunder before a storm. Jehoiada stood near the altar, his hands trembling not from fear, but from reverence. He lifted his voice. "Bring forth the king." From behind the curtain, Jehosheba appeared, holding the young Joash by the hand. The child's eyes were wide, uncertain, but the light of innocence shone in them. The people gasped. Whispers rippled through the temple like wind through reeds. Jehoiada placed a crown upon the boy's head and anointed him with sacred oil. "Behold," he declared, "the son of David whom the Lord has chosen." The trumpets sounded. The Levites began to sing. The crowd, startled, afraid, yet awed, shouted, "Long live the king!" And that cry, carried by the wind, reached the palace. Athaliah was in her chamber when she heard it. The sound froze her blood. Her attendants looked up, their faces pale. "What is that noise?" she demanded. "It comes from the temple, my queen," a servant whispered. "They say the people are rejoicing. A king has been crowned." For a moment, silence. Then the queen's fury erupted. She tore through the corridors, her jeweled sandals striking the marble like thunder. "Who dares?" she screamed. "Who dares defy me in my own city?" She burst through the temple gates, the guards struggling to keep pace. And there, before the altar, she saw it. The child crowned, the priests singing, the people kneeling. Her scream cut through the air like a blade. "Treason! Treason!" But even as she cried out, she saw it in their faces. The fear was gone. The spell was broken. The people she had ruled with terror now looked upon her with hatred. Jehoiada stepped forward, his voice calm and unyielding. "You have slain the sons of the king, but God has preserved one. You have profaned the temple, but the Lord has restored his covenant. Your time is ended." The soldiers seized her, dragging her toward the palace gates. She kicked, cursed, and clawed, but the crowd closed in. Her crown fell to the ground, rolling across the temple floor until it came to rest at Joash's feet. For the first time in years, the air in Jerusalem felt lighter. The idols trembled. The curse began to lift, but as they carried her away, Athaliah's laughter echoed through the streets, low, defiant, almost triumphant. "You think you've won?" she spat. "You think heaven will forgive you? My blood runs through this land. You cannot cleanse it." Even as she was led to her death, her words lingered, a warning, a curse, a prophecy perhaps yet unfinished. And though her reign of terror had ended, the echoes of her sin remained in the stones, the soil, the hearts of those who had watched and done nothing. For darkness, once invited, never truly leaves. It hides, waiting for another proud soul to open the door. And somewhere deep within the palace ruins, a cold wind whispered her name. That was the night Judah took back its crown. But it was also the night the curse began to breathe again. The city of Jerusalem no longer hummed with prayer. It trembled under the iron voice of a woman. I remember the first morning Athaliah stepped onto the palace balcony as queen. The crimson of dawn painted her armor. Her crown gleamed like a dagger's edge, and her voice cut through the silence of the people. "Judah will bow to me," she declared, "and those who defy me will bow to the grave." Her words echoed like thunder through the courtyards. The priests bowed their heads, not in reverence but in fear, for everyone in Jerusalem knew what had happened the night before. Athaliah had slaughtered every royal child in the house of David, every heir, every innocent, strangled in the shadows of their own cradles. At least, that's what everyone believed, because somewhere deep within the temple walls, hidden by trembling hands, one small life had been spared. The priests moved in silence, their faces pale under the flickering oil lamps. Jehosheba, the sister of the late King Ahaziah, had defied death itself. She had stolen her infant nephew, little Joash, from the massacre, and brought him to the temple under the cover of night. When the gates shut behind her, she fell to her knees before Jehoiada, the high priest, and whispered, "Hide him. She must never know." And so began the secret that would haunt Athaliah's reign. For 6 long years, Queen Athaliah ruled Judah with the cruelty of a storm. She tore down altars to the Lord and erected temples to Baal in their place. She took the holy gold from the temple and melted it into idols, placing them before the people with a command: bow or bleed. And the people, terrified and broken, bowed. She trusted no one. Her servants were spies. Her guards were executioners. Every whisper in the courtyard was a potential rebellion. And yet, Athaliah found herself haunted by something she couldn't silence: the sound of a child crying in her dreams. Each night, she would wake in her golden bed drenched in sweat, hearing the echo of a baby's wail in the corridors. She would storm through the palace, torch in hand, shouting at her maids, "Where is it coming from?" "Do you hear it too?" But the halls were empty. The cries came from within her own mind. One evening, as lightning clawed across the sky, Athaliah sat alone in the throne room. A mirror of polished bronze stood before her, a gift from her mother Jezebel. The mirror's surface shimmered like still water. But when she looked into it, she no longer saw herself. She saw Jezebel, beautiful, terrible, smiling. "My daughter," the voice whispered from beyond the glass. "Do not flinch from power. The gods do not weep for blood." Athaliah fell to her knees, clutching the mirror with trembling hands. "Mother," she whispered, "I did what you would have done. I destroyed them all. I took the crown." The reflection's lips curled into a grin. "Oh, you are certain?" Athaliah froze. The question crawled down her spine like ice. "All but..." The cries in the night. Jezebel's reflection hissed. "The bloodline still breathes." From that night onward, madness became her shadow. Athaliah began sending soldiers to scour the city, searching for any child with royal features. Many families wept as their sons were taken. None returned. The palace floors ran red again, but still the whispers continued. "A child lives. The true heir lives." Her rage became desperation. She turned to Baal's prophets, demanding omens and visions. She built altars of flame on the palace roof, sacrificing white doves and lambs, begging for silence. And in those unholy rituals, she began to see faces in the smoke, the faces of her murdered kin staring back at her. They never spoke. They only watched. In the 7th year of her reign, the air of Jerusalem shifted. It began subtly, rumors spreading like dust. Prophet had spoken in the marketplaces. He claimed a descendant of David still lived. The temple bells rang longer that week, their echoes filling the streets. And for the first time in years, people lifted their heads when they prayed. Athaliah noticed. She summoned her spies, her sorcerers, her guards. "Find the source of this lie," she hissed, "and burn it from the city." But what she didn't know was that the seed of rebellion was already growing beneath her own palace walls. In a hidden chamber of the temple, young Joash, barely 7, was being prepared. Jehoiada, now old and wise, placed his hand upon the boy's head and whispered, "You are the last flame of David, and soon Judah will know your name." The priests gathered at midnight, carrying oil and trumpets, their hearts pounding with both fear and faith. They armed the temple guards, men who had once served Athaliah but had secretly sworn allegiance to God's promise. At dawn, the city awoke to the sound of horns. Athaliah rushed to her balcony, her hair unbound, her crown crooked. From the temple courtyard below, she saw the impossible: the priests anointing a boy with holy oil, and the people crying out, "Long live the king! Long live King Joash!" Her blood turned to fire. "Treason!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the hills. "Treason!" She tore through the corridors like a wild beast, her robes dragging embers from the braziers she overturned. Her guards followed, terrified, as she burst into the temple. There, before her, stood Jehoiada, his hands lifted to heaven, and beside him the boy. Her eyes widened. She knew that face. The shape of the chin, the eyes, it was her son's child. The one she thought she had destroyed. No, she whispered, stumbling backward. This is not possible. But the truth stood before her, living and breathing. The crowd parted like the sea as she screamed and cursed, clawing at the air, shouting that the priests had deceived her. But her words fell on deaf ears. The guards she had once commanded now turned their swords toward her. Jehoiada's voice rose above the chaos. Take her out by the horse's gate. Let not the house of the Lord be defiled by her blood. Athaliah's gaze snapped to him. For the first time, fear overtook fury. Jehoiada, she spat. You think you can cleanse Judah by killing me? I am the blood of kings. You strike me and the gods will curse this land. But the guards seized her arms, dragging her through the temple gates as she kicked and screamed, her crown falling into the dust. The people watched in silence as she was led to the very gate through which she had once entered in triumph. And there, beneath the gray dawn, the blade fell. They said the sky broke open with thunder the moment she died. The priests claimed it was the wrath of heaven cleansing Judah. But some whispered that the storm was her mother's doing, that Jezebel's spirit came to claim her daughter's soul, dragging it back into the abyss of her own making. When her body was buried, no one marked her grave. The palace that once shimmered with gold was stripped and purified. The altars of Baal were torn down stone by stone, and in the temple, the child King Joash sat upon the throne of David, trembling, not with pride, but with the weight of what had been done. That night, as the city finally slept in peace, a single lamp burned in the queen's abandoned chambers. Its flame flickered violently, though no wind touched it. And for those who passed by, some swore they heard the faint whisper of a woman's voice, defiant, mournful, eternal. Power was never mine to keep. But it will always remember me. The guards dismissed it as superstition. The priests sealed the room. But the next morning, when the sun rose over Jerusalem, the mirror Jezebel had given her was cracked, split right through the reflection of a crown. And somewhere deep within the silence of the city, a shadow lingered, watching, waiting, because power, once tasted, never truly dies. The death of Athaliah should have brought peace. That's what everyone believed, or wanted to believe. But peace, like incense smoke, never lingers long when it rises from blood-stained altars. In the first months of King Joash's reign, Jerusalem seemed reborn. The people poured into the streets with songs of deliverance. The altars of Baal were smashed, the temple of the Lord restored. The priests washed the courtyards with hyssop and tears, and for the first time in years, the sound of children's laughter filled the air. But in the deep hours of the night, when the last torch in the palace guttered out, the air grew cold again, and the walls began to whisper. The servants spoke of strange things, of footsteps echoing in the queen's abandoned chambers, of a woman's voice, low, commanding, calling names no one dared repeat. Some claimed to have seen her shadow glide past the bronze doors of the throne room, long after midnight, where no one was allowed to enter. The guards mocked it at first, laughing by their fires. But laughter faded when the first guard went missing, then another, and another. Each vanished while on night watch near the old queen's quarters. When the palace was searched, all they found was the faint smell of myrrh and smoke, and a single black feather lying on the stone floor. King Joash was young, yet wise enough to sense something was wrong. He called for Jehoiada, the high priest who had raised him in secret. "Father," he said, his voice trembling, "the palace feels haunted. Every night I dream of her. She stands beside my bed, her crown broken, her hands reaching for me. She whispers, 'The throne is borrowed, not yours.'" Jehoiada placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "Evil leaves echoes, my son. The blood that cries from the ground cannot be silenced easily." He paused, his eyes distant. "There are places in this palace where the curse of her reign still lingers, where idols once drank the blood of innocents. Until every trace of Baal's worship is burned, Judah will not know rest." So, by Jehoiada's order, the priests began a cleansing of the city unlike any before. They carried torches through every street, chanting psalms as they burned relics of Athaliah's rule. Golden idols were melted, their ashes scattered to the winds. The queen's throne was stripped and reforged into temple vessels. But the one thing they could not destroy was her mirror. It had been locked away since her death, hidden beneath cloth but every priest who guarded it claimed it, whispered. Some heard laughter, others cries. A few said they saw faces in its reflection, pleading to be freed. Finally, Jehoiada decided it must be buried. He commanded that it be sealed deep beneath the temple courtyard, beneath 7 stones, never to be unearthed again. Yet as they lowered it into the ground, one priest swore the surface rippled like water, and a voice hissed from within. The blood of kings cannot be buried. Years passed. King Joash grew from a frightened child into a confident ruler. Under Jehoiada's guidance, Judah prospered. The temple was restored to glory, the people rejoiced. But after Jehoiada's death, the young king began to change. He was still righteous by appearance, but something darker stirred beneath his calm. He began holding court in the same hall where Athaliah once ruled. Despite the priest's warnings, he ordered her portrait, once torn and discarded, to be restored. When his counselors questioned him, he smiled faintly and said, "Even evil deserves to be remembered. How else do we learn from it?" But soon his fascination became obsession. He would spend hours alone in the dim throne room, staring into the cracked bronze mirror that had been unearthed by accident during renovations. One evening, as the lamps flickered, Joash sat before the mirror and whispered, "Tell me, grandmother, why did you fall?" The surface rippled, and for a heartbeat, the air grew heavy, like before a storm. And then from the depth of that reflection, a face appeared. It was hers, Athaliah, her eyes like coals, her lips curved in a smile both tender and terrible. "Did I fall?" she asked softly. "Or was I thrown?" Joash's breath caught. "You're dead. Death is only a door," she said, her voice like silk and smoke. "And you, my grandson, have opened it." He stumbled backward, knocking over the lamp, but the flame didn't die. It flared higher, bathing the chamber in red light. "Do not fear me," she said. "You carry my blood, the blood of Jezebel, the fire of kings. You were not born to serve priests. You were born to command them." Joash's pulse thundered in his ears. "What do you want from me?" He whispered. Her reflection smiled. "Only what you already desire, to be remembered." From that night onward, Joash changed. He stopped visiting the temple, claiming he no longer needed priests to speak to God on his behalf. He reintroduced certain ceremonial practices, rites that smelled too much like the old worship of Baal. He adorned the palace walls with gold and scarlet, the same colors Athaliah once favored. The people whispered that their young king had inherited not only her crown, but her spirit, and perhaps her curse. The first omen came with fire. One summer night, lightning struck the temple roof. Flames devoured the upper chambers before dawn. When the priests tried to enter, they found the air so thick with heat that the stone itself burned their feet. When the fire finally died, the courtyard was blackened, but the place where Athaliah's mirror had been buried remained untouched. A perfect circle of ash surrounded it. Yet the ground above it was cool. Jehoiada's surviving disciples took it as a warning. The curse still breathes, but Joash refused to listen. He silenced those who spoke against him. When a prophet confronted him in the temple courtyard, the young king ordered the man stoned. As the prophet fell, his dying words echoed through the hall. "Because you have forsaken the Lord, the blood of your grandmother will return to you." Those who witnessed it said the sky turned gray, and thunder rolled through a cloudless sky. That night, the palace mirrors cracked one by one. From then on, Joash became haunted by visions. He saw Athaliah in his dreams, standing beside his throne, whispering, "Power is the only truth." When he woke, her voice still echoed in the corridors. He began to distrust his own sons, fearing they would rise against him as he once rose against her. History was repeating itself, one drop of blood at a time. And then came the coup. Joash's own officials, weary of his tyranny, conspired against him. They struck him down in his bedchamber, his crown rolling into the same pool of blood that once stained Athaliah's floor. As his life faded, he turned his head toward the darkened mirror at the foot of his bed. And there, Through the blur of death, he saw her one last time, Athaliah, smiling. "Welcome home, my child," she whispered. Then the mirror shattered. When dawn came, the palace was silent. The servants fled, the priests wept, and the city stood in uneasy calm. They buried Joash with royal honors, but no one dared enter the queen's old chambers again. The doors were sealed forever, and yet, for generations after, strange things were said to occur in that part of the palace. Mirrors cracking without reason, torches dying without wind, the faint scent of myrrh lingering in empty halls. And when a new king took the throne, he found a single object left behind in the treasury, a shard of bronze, darkened with age. When he looked into it for just a second, he thought he saw eyes looking back, eyes that gleamed like fire. The curse of Athaliah, they say, was not one of death but remembrance. For even now, centuries later, her name is whispered in fear and fascination. A queen who defied heaven, a mother who murdered her blood, a ghost who refused to vanish, and somewhere, deep beneath the stones of Jerusalem, her voice still murmurs through time, soft, seductive, eternal. Power is a crown no grave can bury. Centuries have passed since Athaliah's screams echoed through the temple courts, yet somehow, her story refuses to die. Time buries kings and kingdoms, empires and faiths, but some names live on like wounds that never close. And in the dust of Jerusalem, the shadow of that queen still lingers. It is said that every few generations, someone claims to find a fragment, an inscription, a shard, a symbol belonging to her reign. Each discovery is met with awe and unease, as though the earth itself is reluctant to let her rest. The city has been conquered and rebuilt countless times. Layers of history lie like veils upon one another. Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, yet beneath them all lies the scar of Athaliah, the mark of a woman who tried to erase the divine line of David and, in doing so, cursed her own blood. It began again in our time, or so the story goes. In 2019, a team of Israeli archaeologists excavating near the southern steps of the Temple Mount unearthed something unusual. Buried deep beneath layers of ash and broken pottery was a bronze fragment, darkened with age. Upon its surface, faint etchings could still be seen, letters of the ancient Phoenician script, the kind used in Tyre during Jezebel's dynasty. But beneath those markings was another symbol, a crown surrounded by 7 circles. The artifact was tested, analyzed, debated. Some said it was merely decorative. Others whispered that it matched descriptions from lost temple records. Records speaking of an object once banned, one that belonged to the mother of abominations. The locals called it the Mirror of the Queen. The museum refused to display it. Strange things began to happen when it was handled. Lights flickered. Cameras malfunctioned. One researcher claimed to hear whispers when she was alone in the lab, voices speaking in a language no one could identify. At first, her colleagues dismissed it as fatigue, but when she described the words she heard, a scholar of ancient Hebrew recognized a chilling phrase. The blood of kings cannot be buried. The same words Jehoiada's priests had recorded centuries ago. The artifact was quietly sealed and sent to a restricted archive. But word of it leaked, as all forbidden things do. Some said that before it was locked away, a guard took a photograph of it under infrared light. In the image, reflected faintly upon the metal, was a face. Not clearly seen, only the outline, the curve of a jaw, the glimmer of 2 eyes burning like embers. When asked about it later, the guard simply said, "She was smiling." Legends grew once more around the queen's name. A few religious scholars warned that her story was resurfacing because humanity was repeating her sin. That power had become the new idol, disguised not in temples, but in hearts. They said the spirit of Athaliah was not a ghost, but a pattern, a symbol of what happens when ambition replaces reverence, when the sacred is sacrificed for control. Think of it. In a world obsessed with dominance, influence and self-worship, is her legacy truly gone? Or has it simply evolved? Each generation builds its idols anew. They may no longer be carved from gold or stone, but they are worshipped just the same. Fame, wealth, vanity, supremacy. Perhaps Athaliah's curse was never about mirrors or thrones. Perhaps it was about the reflection within every human heart, the same temptation that whispers, "You can be like God." The scriptures tell us that even in her darkness, God's light prevailed. The infant Joash survived. The covenant endured. The line of David continued, leading generations later to the birth of one who would wear no crown of gold, but a crown of thorns. That, perhaps, is the divine irony. The woman who tried to destroy the bloodline of salvation only became part of the prophecy she could never understand. Her rage, her pride, her ambition, all served a greater plan, one that she was blind to. Athaliah thought she was silencing heaven. In truth, she was echoing it. Her fall became proof that even the darkest human will cannot extinguish divine purpose. And yet, the question remains, why does her story still haunt us? Why does her name still carry a chill after nearly 3,000 years? Maybe because we see a piece of her in ourselves. Every time pride blinds compassion, every time vengeance disguises itself as justice, every time we grasp for control and lose our humanity, we resurrect her. Not in spirit, but in behavior. She was not born a monster. She was made into one by fear. Fear of loss, fear of irrelevance, fear of divine judgment. And fear, when left to rule the heart, always leads to destruction. The greatest danger of Athaliah's legacy is not the curse of her blood, but the temptation to believe that we are beyond accountability, that we can rewrite truth, bend destiny, and silence conscience. It's a lie that wears many crowns. But there is hope, even in her story, because the same God who allowed her fall is the God who preserved one life in secret. A baby hidden in a temple chamber, a whisper of mercy amid chaos. That is the pattern of redemption, light surviving in shadow, faith enduring under tyranny, and that is why Athaliah's reign, though terrifying, is not the end of the story. It's a reminder that divine promises cannot die. The line of David lives still. The covenant still stands, and the blood that cried from the stones of Judah now speaks forgiveness, not vengeance. Today, if you walk through the ruins of Jerusalem at dusk, the air hums with ancient memory. The sun bleeds into the horizon, casting long shadows across the city's walls. Tourists pass by, unaware that beneath their feet lie the remnants of a queen's throne room, buried under centuries of dust. Sometimes, when the wind blows through those old stones, it almost sounds like a voice, soft, distant, unfinished, and perhaps merciful. Maybe the curse was never truly hers to give. Maybe it was our misunderstanding, our tendency to see tragedy as punishment rather than prophecy. For even in her destruction, Athaliah's story carries a strange grace, the proof that no rebellion can undo what heaven has decreed. The child she tried to kill became the seed of a promise that would outlive every empire. And that promise still whispers through the ages, louder than any curse. The kingdom belongs not to those who seize it, but to those who are chosen. And so the queen who would not die finally fades, not into darkness but into lesson, because in every era her mirror reappears, not to haunt but to warn, when pride stands where faith should kneel, when ambition drowns humility, when the crown outweighs the soul. The reflection of Athaliah is never far away, and when you look too long into that reflection, perhaps if you listen closely enough, you'll hear her final whisper through time. Power is fleeting, but the soul remembers. The air is still in Jerusalem tonight. The streets are quiet, and the moon hangs low, its pale light brushing the walls of a city that has seen too much of both glory and grief. Beneath this silence, beneath layers of sand and shattered kingdoms, something ancient still waits. They say that when the moon aligns perfectly over the Temple Mount, the old stones whisper, not in words but in rhythm, like the pulse of a memory too sacred to die. And if you stand there long enough listening, you might hear it, the story that never ended, the one that began with a queen's scream and a child's cry. Athaliah's curse, they say, was not death. It was remembrance. Remembrance is the truest form of prophecy. Scholars once thought her story was complete, written, judged, closed. But when the bronze shard believed to be from her mirror was examined under ultraviolet light, something else appeared, faint, nearly invisible. A second layer of inscription emerged beneath the Phoenician letters. It was Hebrew, and older than the exile, older even than the temple scrolls. It read, "The flame that destroys shall also preserve the covenant." No one could explain it. How could a woman condemned for evil bear words that spoke of preservation, not ruin? But prophecy has a way of hiding within contradiction. Athaliah believed she was ending the line of David, yet by forcing that line into hiding, she preserved it. The child she sought to kill was protected within the heart of the temple, the very place she had defiled. And that same child would later continue the bloodline that led to the Messiah. So the mirror, the curse, the slaughter, everything she meant for destruction, became the soil in which redemption was sown. Theologians call this the paradox of divine symmetry, that even rebellion is not beyond the reach of God's order. The darkness that Athaliah unleashed became the perfect contrast to the light that followed. Her pride birthed humility. Her bloodshed gave rise to mercy. Her silence set the stage for the Word made flesh. Think of it, one queen's act of horror, echoing through millennia to the very heart of salvation. The scar of Athaliah became the map of divine intention. But there is something deeper still, something that historians rarely mention. An apocryphal scroll found near Qumran, its authenticity debated. Its script nearly lost to time, contains a haunting prophecy. And the daughter of Jezebel shall rise, clothed in the son of Tyre, and crowned with the stars of Judah. She shall slay her sons, and her blood shall curse the ground. Yet from her ashes shall rise a root, unseen by kings, guarded by the holy. And upon that root shall bloom the mercy of the Lord. It is unsigned, its origin uncertain, but if true, it reframes everything. Athaliah's fall was not an accident. It was foreseen, foreordained. The horror was allowed so that mercy might have meaning. The curse existed only so grace could conquer it. When the mirror's shard was last examined, researchers noticed something strange. When light passed through it at a certain angle, it refracted not just reflection, but pattern. The etched circles on its surface formed the shape of a menorah, a symbol of divine light. Perhaps it was coincidence, or perhaps buried beneath her rebellion. There was still a spark of what once was holy. Even in the heart of wickedness, divine ember flickers. Imagine that moment when Athaliah stood on the temple steps, sword in hand, screaming for blood. Around her the priests stood in silence, their faith trembling but unbroken. And in a hidden chamber behind the altar, a baby's cry pierced the night, the sound that changed history. That is how God works. Not through thunder or spectacle, but through fragile life preserved in the midst of violence. The child was named Joash, meaning Yahweh has given. And indeed, he was not only a child saved, he was a prophecy fulfilled. For centuries later, another child would be born, this time in Bethlehem, carrying the same covenant Athaliah tried to extinguish. The lineage survived through grace, through patience, through divine irony. The curse became the foundation of a promise, and yet, there is another mystery. In the archives of a monastery near Mount Carmel lies a fragment of parchment, a 10th century copy of an even older Syriac text. On it are written these words, "The queen who defied heaven shall kneel in the end. Her name shall not vanish, for remembrance is the mercy of judgment. When the world forgets her, pride will return. So the Lord commands that her name endure, not as damnation, but as warning." Perhaps that is why Athaliah's name still echoes in sermons and scripture, in whispers and legends. Because forgetting her would mean forgetting the line between faith and arrogance, between divine calling and human corruption. Her immortality, it seems, was not granted by demons but by God himself, that we might never again mistake power for divinity. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture her now, not the screaming queen of blood and terror, but the woman beneath the crown. A daughter who was taught that love was weakness. A mother who saw power as her only safety. A soul that reached for the heavens and fell into her own shadow. Perhaps at the final breath she understood. Perhaps she saw the child she failed to kill, the fragile thread of mercy that her cruelty had preserved. And perhaps she whispered, even as the sword descended, a prayer that was neither repentance nor defiance, but realization. You are God and I am not. That is the revelation. Not of horror, but of truth. Athaliah's story is not only about what she destroyed, It is about what she could not destroy. She could silence prophets, but not prophecy. She could burn altars, but not faith. She could murder bloodlines, but not destiny. And in that contrast, between her defiance and God's patience, lies the heart of divine mystery. So when you hear her name, do not hear only the echo of evil. Hear also the whisper of redemption hidden beneath it. For in every fall, heaven plants a seed of rising. In every curse, the faint outline of a blessing waits to be revealed. And in every proud heart, no matter how darkened, God leaves a crack wide enough for light to enter. Tonight, the moon hangs over Jerusalem once more. Its light glints faintly on the ancient stones, stones that have seen blood and blessing, rebellion and grace. Somewhere beneath them lies the dust of a queen who once thought herself invincible, but the city still stands, the covenant still breathes, and the light that she tried to drown still shines upon the same hills where prophets once wept. Because that is the final truth of Athaliah's story. No curse can outlast a promise. The palace is gone now, its marble halls shattered, its golden throne buried beneath centuries of dust and silence. But the spirit of what happened there, the lesson written in the ashes of Athaliah's reign, still speaks. When pride sits upon the heart like a crown, it blinds the soul. When vengeance replaces prayer, the voice of heaven grows distant. And when power becomes the only God we serve, judgment does not come as thunder. It comes as silence, as emptiness, as the slow unraveling of everything we once called ours. Athaliah believed she was preserving her legacy. In truth, she was burying it. The hands that once ruled with iron now tremble in the memory of blood. And though her body turned to dust, her story became a mirror held up to every generation that would come after. How many of us, in smaller ways, repeat her sin? How many build their lives upon control, ambition, fear, only to discover that the crown was hollow? We destroy relationships in the name of pride. We silence compassion to protect ego. And like Athaliah, we mistake survival for destiny. But God does not abandon the story even when it darkens. Out of the ashes of her reign rose Joash, the hidden child, the spark of mercy preserved in secret. His survival was no accident. It was a message that divine purpose can outlast any human evil, that even when the temple is desecrated, faith can still be found trembling in its corners. Sometimes God allows the wicked to reign for a season, so that their fall becomes a sermon for all who follow. In that silence, in that suffering, heaven teaches the heart what words cannot. The people of Judah learned not through comfort, but through consequence. They saw that prophecy is not just a warning. It is a mirror showing what the heart will choose when no one is watching. Athaliah's life is not merely a tale of cruelty. It is a portrait of the danger that dwells in all of us. The hunger to be remembered, the terror of losing control, the refusal to bow. Each of these is a seed of the same curse that consumed her. But where her story ends in ruin, ours can begin in repentance. For every curse that pride awakens, humility can silence. For every chain of fear, faith can break. The same God who allowed Athaliah to fall also preserved Joash to rise. A reminder that darkness does not write the final chapter. Walk among the ruins in your mind. Imagine the echo of her footsteps fading through the palace corridors, her jeweled sandals striking marble that no longer shines. The torches burn low, the throne is empty, and yet, somewhere beyond the walls, a child breathes, a lineage survives. A promise lives on. That is the mercy of God, the quiet persistence of His plan, hidden beneath centuries of human pride and failure. The story of Athaliah is not about wrath. It is about restoration, about how even the darkest moments in Scripture are stitched with the silver thread of redemption. So when you face your own moments of downfall, when pride burns, when anger blinds, when you feel the world crumble beneath your choices, remember this: God's silence is not His absence. His delay is not His denial. Somewhere unseen, something sacred is being preserved for you. Perhaps that is why these stories still echo through time. They are not ancient warnings carved for strangers. They are living truths whispered to the hearts of those still searching. You and I, the ones still learning how to wear humility like a crown, how to choose forgiveness over fury, how to build not an empire, but a soul, And if Athaliah's tale leaves us uneasy, it is because it was meant to. Scripture does not comfort the complacent. It awakens the sleeping. It reminds us that no title, no bloodline, no ambition can outshine obedience. The real throne is not of gold, but of grace. So as the wind sweeps through the ruins of Judah, carrying the dust of forgotten kings, let it whisper to you what it once whispered to them, that every heart has a kingdom within it. And whoever you allow to rule, fear, pride, faith, or love will decide its fate. Choose wisely, for the crown you lift may one day be the weight that brings you to your knees. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who seeks truth in the echoes of Scripture. Let the lessons of Athaliah remind us all that pride fades, but faith endures. Tell me in the comments, what did this story awaken in you? Do you believe curses still walk through generations today? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you wish to journey deeper into the forgotten corners of the Bible, where prophecy, mystery, and emotion meet, subscribe to Legends of the Bible. Together, we'll uncover the divine secrets hidden within ancient words.